Hello, my name is Dr. Bradley Alisea. I'm the head scientist and PI at the Orthogonal Research and Education Laboratory. We're located in Champaign-Urbana in Illinois in the United States, but we have collaborators worldwide working on different projects. And we are located we have a website on Weebly, we have a GitHub repository organization, we have a YouTube channel, we have a Medium where we publish a lot of interesting things. We have a LinkedIn presence and a Twitter feed. So today I'm going to talk about Google Summer of Code 2022 and our involvement in Google Summer of Code this year. And we have another video where I discuss our educational philosophy behind Google Summer of Code in this same open house channel. So be sure to check that out if you have more questions about our approach to Google Summer of Code. And I also mentioned it in our State of the Lab for 2022 video. That's also in this channel. So this year we actually hosted 3 projects, and 2 of these were in conjunction with the OpenWorm Foundation. One of them was purely within the purview of Orthogonal Lab. So the first one was this DGNN's project, or Developmental Graph Neural Networks project. And we had 2 students working on that, Jiahong Li and Wataru Kawakami, and there was a third collaborator who was not a Google Summer of Code student. In that group, they worked on building these DGNNs, which I'll talk about in a minute. We also did a project called Digital Microspheres. This is a spherical mapping of 2-dimensional microscopy slices. So you're taking 2-dimensional microscopy slices of an embryo and you're tiling them onto a sphere. And our students there were Hari Krishna Pillai and Karan Lohan. And they were from the same university in India. So they were able to work together on this project, not only in our lab meetings, but also they did talk together in person on it. So it was some interesting work they were able to do. Finally, the project Open Source Sustainability. This is a project that was involved building tools for making open source communities more sustainable. And this has ties to both the Orthogonal Labs open source initiative and the Society Tech and Ethics group. And so this is, we had 3 students for this, Brian McCorkle, Himanshu Shogul, and Syed Hussein Ather. And so what our approach to this, very briefly, is to take each one of these projects and offer students ask them to solve the problem or provide a solution. And then they'd be selected based on how good their solution was. This year we were able to get 2 for each of these 2 projects in OpenWorm. Actually, it was in the DevoWorm group, which is sponsored by the OpenWorm Foundation. And then this third project was, we got 3 students, and this was sponsored by our own sort of lab group. And so the idea then is they have this sort of adversarial approach to solving the problem. So they would have different approaches, rival approaches, maybe complementary approaches, but they'd all kind of meet together and we'd hash out the details. And so at the end of the summer, we'd have different components of this problem solved. So the first project, Developmental Graph Neural Networks, or DGNNs, the point of this project was to create graph embeddings for analyzing cellular development. When I say cellular development, I mean microscopy images of development. So I was able to provide a number of data sets for C. elegans embryos, and they went through these data sets. Wataru actually went through and produced a pipeline for segmentation and perfected that. And then Jiahong actually worked on the graph embeddings part. So he took inspiration from a paper that was published this year. He was able to take that, refactor that code, and then apply it, and then look towards looking at like topological data analysis and other types of approaches like that. So we were able to take these data, segment the cells, create a network graph embedding, and then move to something like a topological representation or complex networks representation. So the devorm group has been doing work on complex networks in embryos, and this is going to help in that work, but it's also going to help in some of our longer term goals in terms of topological data analysis that we would like to do. And we were drawing heavily from the work of the DevoLearn package, which was done in previous years. And so we had a strong basis for doing our cell segmentation. So this all came together very nicely. This software is now available in the DevoLearn organization under the DevoGraph repository. If you go there, you can download a version of this and try it out for yourself. The second project is Digital Microspheres. And Digital Microspheres involves creating an atlas and analysis tool for the surface of an embryo. So it's kind of almost like Google Earth, where you have a sphere, you map the sphere, you have basically the way Google Earth works is they take images of the surface of the planet Earth, and they get it at a certain resolution. And then they put together this map, which you can view then as a two-dimensional terrain on your computer screen. And you can zoom around and explore the surface. So this is roughly what we wanted to do with Digital Microspheres. We wanted to create this sphere that you could explore. You could explore the surface of, in this case, the axolotl embryo. We worked with data from one of our collaborators who works in axolotl embryos. And she's actually very good at imaging axolotl embryos in a way that gives you the full view of the surface. And so we'll talk about that in the next slide. But you can see here that a lot of the project was focused around mapping data onto a sphere. Because when you do microscopy, generally you still have a two-dimensional image. And you have to then take those two-dimensional images and tile a sphere. And so at the end of the coding period, we had two approaches to doing the spherical mapping. And so now this code is available in our in DevoRM's GSoC 2022 repository. There's a Digital Microspheres directory, and it's in there. Both of the different programs are in there. And it involved using a lot of innovative algorithms and a lot of unique approaches. So I encourage you to check it out. So Susan Crawford Young, who is one of our collaborators in the group, she's very good at inventing different types of microscopes to look at spherical objects like embryos or other types of things. And so she's developed this ball microscope. And this is one of the inspirations for, or at least one of the things that will help future versions of this project to take an embryo, which is placed in the middle on a stage in the middle of that sphere. And then you have these lipstick cameras that are 9 angles of perspective. So you have 9 points of view around that stage. And you can take pictures of the embryo that's on that stage from all different angles. So you have 9 images of the embryo at different angles. And then the idea is that you can stitch those together into a sphere. So that once you do that, you have a continuous sphere that you can twirl around. And so this was this example this is from one of the pieces of software that were created this summer. And you have this mapping, and you can explore the surface of the embryo. You can give it, you can look at different landmarks. You can look at the distance between the different landmarks. The reason we want to use axolotl embryos is because they're large and because they actually are transparent with respect to neural development. So you can actually see the brain developing. So we can acquire images at different stages of axolotl development, put them into this atlas, and see this virtually. So there are a lot of potential applications to this software. We didn't get everything we wanted to get done this summer, but that's the nature of research. Susan has also developed a flipping microscope to, it basically pulls the embryo down on a water column and then lets it flip back up. And in doing so, it exposes this sort of rotational aspect to the camera that's on top. And so you can actually see the entire surface of the embryo that way. So there are a lot of ways we can generate this type of data and get a lot of nice geometric specific features of these embryos. Finally, our last project for this summer was open source sustainability, and this was three students, Hussein, Himanshu, and Brian. And our goal was to create tools for ethical and sustainable behavior in open source communities. We had an open source meeting every Friday, and in that meeting we did a lot of brainstorming and debugging, and I helped students with like data sources and other types of things, and we reviewed papers, and it was actually a pretty good uh, community of people working on this. So we ended up with a number of different perspectives here on this problem, one of which was Brian's approach, which leveraged active inference and leveraged some collective behavior algorithms to build a model of a collective, you know, a collective cognition or open source community that was based on collective cognition. So there were a lot of interesting things that Brian put into this model. Um, the goal is to produce an agent-based model that would allow us to simulate some of these behaviors and allow us to select for virtuous behaviors and kind of know why that was happening. So Brian used these different techniques to develop a model of collective cognition. Himanshu developed a model that was actually quite interesting. It was based on reinforcement learning techniques, multi-agent reinforcement learning, or MARL. And he looked at the sort of the structure of a community in terms of how do you take someone who's contributing or might contribute to the community, and then how easy is it for them to become something like a maintainer? And so if you go from like a contributor to a maintainer, the chance that that community will become sustainable is greater if you can get people into your community and keep them and get them doing more important tasks. And he used some data from the Wikipedia Foundation on their contributor categories and their numbers of contributors and things like that. So he was able to validate it with data. So it's a really interesting approach. Finally, Hussein developed a model looking at emotional states and personalities and how how those interact with collective behavior. His original goal was to get to model the ethical regulator, which is a concept from cybernetics. It's actually from Nick Ashby, who's I think related to W.R. Ashby, but he couldn't get it's one of these problems where you have a vague mathematical model and you can't necessarily map it to the software. So he took a different direction on that, but it's still very useful for our research. And what we hope to do with this is to not only do research, help people do research into their open source communities, but use some of these pieces of software for some of our other initiatives in the lab. So Hussein's software might be very useful for some of the things we're exploring with allostatic kinds, or some of the stuff with agent-based modeling in terms of Himanshu's project. We're trying to look at how to train different types of embodied agents. And so a lot of these projects have different tentacles that will reach into different parts of the organization. The software is available at the OREL in the OREL group GitHub organization under the GSoC repository, and there's a directory for open source ethics, and that's where all three of these packages are. And so coming soon, Brian, who I mentioned in the last slide, is spearheading a group at his university, and they're working on a class project to take all of these models that were developed this summer in the open source sustainability area, so all three models, and put them into a repository, and he calls it the sustainability auditing tool. And what will allow people to do is if you run an open source community, or if you're interested in open source and how to make it sustainable, you can go to this tool and you can figure out kind of your parameters of your community or your contributor base, and you can find a good model that will help you understand how to make that more sustainable. So if I come up with an open source project and I have some contributors and I want to know how many contributors I need to recruit, or how I need to make it so that they will continue to contribute, I can do all this. I can simulate those communities in an agent-based model and put this out. It'll help me achieve my goals. So this is something that's going to be on the web at sustainabilityauditingtool.com, probably by the end of the year. And they're working on open source software for this at github.com/set-7, which is sustainability auditing tool. And so if you're interested, check that out. That's actually forthcoming. It's not quite there yet, but we're then, maybe next year in 2023, we'll follow up on this even more. And, hopefully that'll attract more people coming in and we can do more work on it. And I'd also like to add, additionally, that we have other open source initiatives from past years. So one of these is from 2019, we had a group working on developmental Bradenburg vehicles. And this last year, we were able to get the paper from that work published. So way back in 2019, we did a GSoC project on developmental Bradenburg vehicles. We had a number of students who produced things, and those packages were put into a paper, and that paper has now finally been published. But the paper is based on open source code and 3 different platforms. So that software is available for open source download. And if you want to create a fork of that repository, if you want to create your own version of these pieces of software, and you can go read the paper to find out more about them. We have BroadGen Brain, which is a way of building brain vehicle brains using genetic algorithms. We have Multi-Learn, which is building a Bradenburg or training a Bradenburg vehicle using Hebbian learning and multi-sensory integration. And then BV collectives, which are Bradenburg vehicles that act in a collective. And so they're very interesting developmental consequences to collective behavior and the emergence of different structures that a bunch of vehicles would take around a stimulus. So those things, you can not only read about them, but you can develop your own version of it, or you can play around with the software. At that repository, it's in the OREL group organization under developmental BVs in that repository. And so that's all I have today to talk to you about. We have other opportunities for open source, especially in the DevoWorm group. We've done a lot of work with DevoLearn, and there's also DevoWorm AI, which if you go to the DevoWorm website, you can find with devoworm.weebly.com, you can find out more about those platforms as well. And it's a lot of deep learning and developmental biology. So thank you for your attention.